Welcome back to the Piano Lessons 1, 2, 3 web series. If you've made it through the Science of Sound video, then I encourage you to continue on. We're going to actually get started with some music theory now. Here we're looking at the first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Once again, we referenced this later in the first video. And the thing I want to take note of is this piece of music, the things that make it up. Well, we have quite a few things going on this page, really, especially for somebody who doesn't have too much musical experience. So let's talk about what we see here. Well, of course, we see our title, that's no surprise, from Piano Sonata number 14. That probably refers to a catalog number, so it's the 14th sonata in some series. L.V. Beethoven, Ludwig van Beethoven, the composer. We have Adagio sostenuto. It's some performance instructions telling us what type of piece it is. Some words in Italian there, an entire phrase. If you were to look those up, those would probably further explain either the story behind the piece or more performance instructions. And then we have the mechanics of it, the things that we expect to see when we look at music. We have this long beam that continues along the entire page several times. We have one here, one here, one here, one here. And what these are called, these sets of 5 lines and 4 spaces, 5 lines and 4 spaces, is a staff. Just like that you might have at a place of work, a staff. And what the staff does is it allows us to graph what pitch or what frequency we want to be played at what point in time. So if you reduce it down to nothing, which we'll do in a minute, you're really breaking it down to which frequency, what button on the piano, and when do you want it to be played, now or later. And what else do we have? Well, we have 2 of those. We have a staff here and a staff here. When you have multiple staffs, you don't call them staffs, you call them staves. It's just a grammatical correction, an exception to the rules. Then we have this thing that connects them. We have these bar lines, and we have this curved brace. We have these symbols at the beginning, which we call clefs. We have these, not hashtags, but sharps. They tell us to change the key a little bit. This little C with an X through it, cut time, perhaps? Well, that's a time signature, something we'll talk about in a few videos from now. And then, of course, we have these little dots. Some of them are filled in, some of them are hollow, some of them have stems, some of them are beamed together. But what all of these dots are called are notes. And that tells you, yes, play that pitch. Yes, press that key. And do it now, and hold it for this long. All of that information is construed through what you see. And we need to begin breaking this down so we can ourselves read it and play it back. Well, you might ask, a staff has 5 lines and 4 spaces. Why is that true? Was that always the case? And no, in fact it wasn't. Probably between the years of 1400 and 1600, somewhere during the Renaissance period, we settled on this system of 5 lines and 4 spaces as the standardized musical staff. Before that, it probably wasn't always 5 lines and 4 spaces. Instead, it might have been something like 4 lines and 3 spaces, or maybe even 6 lines and 5 spaces. And we didn't really have a good grasp on time signature, and we didn't really have clear notes that were standardized to pitches. Instead, you had this interesting series of little squiggles on a page. So I'm going to draw up a mock staff. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll stop there. It might not have had 5 lines, as we said. And instead of seeing perfect dots as notes, we didn't have those yet. Instead, we might have had these little squiggles. And what those were called were neumes. And neumes were a direction, similar to notes to press a key or play a certain note. Neumes simply told you what direction your voice was supposed to go when performing hymns or chants for the church. That's right, music traces its origins back in two different areas, the sacred and the secular, or church music and music not of the church. And the church really put in big strides to standardize music so that their hymns could be heard all around and that they could be standardized and normalized. They figured that the closer we make these things and the more unity we have, the more strength in our church. And so they put an effort into music education and into making a standardized system. So these neumes really told you that, your pitch should be higher here than here, and you're going to move your voice sort of upwards and then downwards. So they gave you a general shape of the music, but they didn't constrict you to certain frequencies like modern day notes do. Today, if you read middle C, a certain note on a staff, you know that middle C should ring at concert pitch of 261 hertz, or 261 oscillations of sound pressure per second. That was not the case in this period, and in fact, even if there was a chant among several members, it was usually sung in unison instead of in harmony, that meaning they all sang the same pitches at the same times, and they moved as one, because they didn't have a great way of tuning to each other. Also, during this early period, there wasn't necessarily tonality the way we know it, where you sing a song and you know it's going to start off a certain way, and then you expect it to end on a certain note, a certain key, a certain tonic pitch. No, instead they have church modes, and those modes had a certain collection of notes, much like a scale, but not exactly the same sounding as a scale. So I think that's a good introduction to how we came to music. And then around 1600, when we had a standardized system, I can't guarantee that it was widespread. There wasn't exactly emails and memos that went out. But somewhere around the 1600s, things started to normalize. We entered into the Baroque period, a period characterized by a very famous composer, Johann Sebastian Bach. And that period spanned from 1600 to 1750, and that was greatly characterized by church music. Of course, secular music existed as well, but much of the music we recognize from that period, if not Johann Sebastian Bach's, was related to the church somehow. We had much vocal music, and a big instrument of the period, not the piano, the organ. Yes, the organ, a monstrous instrument that at that point took up a lot of space and was really only found in churches, was the major instrument of that period. Well, major keyboard instrument anyways. So what we need to do now is we need to describe something. Well, we had neumes, and that was great, but it didn't really tell us enough, and it made it difficult to perform. So then we standardized it. And what does all this tell us? Well, when you break it down to simplest terms, music is like a graph. It's like a plot. It tells us frequency, and it tells us time. And what this really tells us is what to play and when to play it. Now, when we go through frequency, the number of frequencies we could have in a certain range are continuous. There's an infinitesimal number of frequencies we could have. We could have 260, we could have 260.01, 260.02, 261.03, and so on. And we could go all the way up into the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, and so on. Now, if you look at a piano, there are not millions of buttons to push. There are a certain number of keys. There are actually 88 of them, including white keys and black keys. 52 white and 36 black keys, nearly full 8 octaves to play. And so you can imagine that we don't play every frequency in the spectrum, Instead, we have selected a few in a certain order that allow us to play the music the way we know it. So I told you that middle C, or the C most medial on the piano, is 261 Hertz concert pitch. And you might be surprised, but the note next to it, D, or before D, but C sharp, which falls in between C and D, well, that is not 262 Hertz. No, it's rather a discrete system. So, yes, the one above it will have a bigger number than the one below it, but it will not necessarily be the next one in the sequence. They are discontinuous, they are discrete, and they are just pre-decided based on what the musical scales and tonal systems we have. Now, this might go above and beyond what you think you need to know, and if it doesn't seem like it applies to you, that's absolutely okay, but it's something you should consider. Now, let's start talking more about what we use today, the typical musical staff. Well, the musical staff we have today, as we've said a few times now, is 5 lines and 4 spaces, and it looks something like this, 5 lines, 4 spaces, and this gives us an order. And we know that if it's something, well, a special something, a note, whether it be a whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note, 16th note, 32nd note, 64th note, so on and so forth, whatever rhythmic value it has, meaning how long you want to hold it for, whatever you have, if you plot it down here, it's going to have a lower sound or a smaller frequency than if you plot it up here. And that's great. But we're not yet specific enough. This staff doesn't tell us where to play. So like this is a map of a bunch of streets without names. So we know they're streets. We know they connect in some way, and they go in this series. But we don't know yet where we're located. Now we need to back up just a second. We need to go back and we need to talk about something very important, the musical alphabet. Now these frequencies are great. Yes, we could determine that all of the pitches on a piano are by their frequency. But that is really difficult to do. It's a lot of numbers to remember, 88 probably 3 or 4 digit numbers. And it's cumbersome. And it doesn't tell us a whole lot of information. So instead, we apply letter names to these frequencies or these buttons on the piano. And the way the musical alphabet works, let me change colors here, is we have 7 unique letters. Only 7. Sounds surprising, right? We have 88 buttons on the piano and yet only 7 letters we can use. So what do we do now? And the letters we use are those of the regular alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. No H. We stop at G. 7 letters and 88 keys. What are we to do? Well, the alphabet actually continues on, but instead of going to a new letter, it repeats. So after G, you guessed it, we go through it again. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now, I suppose you could do this on and on forever, but eventually we'd get up to a point where we're so high in frequency that us humans cannot hear the pitch anymore, or we'd go so low that, again, us humans could not hear that pitch. So when you get to the beginning of an alphabet, if you want to keep going lower, you then jump backwards to G. Now, the nice thing about this system is it's a lot easier to say C than 261 Hertz concert pitch. So that's one nice thing about it. It's more compact. The other nice thing is it shows relationships. So you notice that we repeat letters, right? And if we were to use the Hertz system and give everything their actual frequency numbers, we wouldn't have any repeats. It wouldn't be 261 and then 261 again when we get to C. No, this would be a bigger number. But the cool thing about this system here is it shows a relationship. So indeed, if you play a note along with itself, or play octaves, when you play a note back to itself, this is called an octave. An octave refers to the amount of space either from a note to the same note or same letter name note. Or if I told you, for example, to play an octave on the piano, an octave C, you would play a low C and a higher C, presumably with your pinky and your thumb. And interestingly, whenever you play two keys that have the same letter, it sounds pretty good. It sounds consonant. Consonant means it sounds good together. There's no clash. So that wouldn't be true if you played C and D together. If you played C and D together, you'd get a crunchy sound. Crunchy is a food term, but it works for music also. It means that you'd hear some undesirable sound in there. It's used in music. It doesn't mean we don't use it. It's just referred to as dissonant or a bit more of a clash. So that is something that the letters give us an advantage of. So that's really the main reason we use it. Now, I told you that this is one octave, right? And the piano has nearly 8 full octaves. So there's a lot more to this. And of course, if it gets lower and lower and lower, or higher and higher and higher, the frequency will get smaller or greater, respectively. Now, I'm going to show us a picture of the piano. And that's going to start tying some of this in. So we have pitches, we have notes A through C, and it repeats, sorry about that, A through G, and it repeats A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So here I have a picture of a full-size piano keyboard. I say full size because if you play an electric keyboard, it might be truncated. Truncated meaning they chopped off part of it and only gave you some of the keys. And that happens at different lengths. A full piano or an acoustic piano has 88 keys. As I said, 52 white and 36 black. And right off the bat, do you notice a pattern? Do you notice that there are groupings of 2 keys and groupings of 3 keys? Or how I call them twins and triplets? You'll also notice that there's one black key at the end of the piano, at the left end, or the bass, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's look for something. I have to give you some information because you do not have enough, if you're a beginner, to figure out where we are. I want to point out that this key right here, this one white key that is to the left of the twins, is C. Now this one that I pointed out, that specific C, is middle C, or concert pitch, or, if it's in tune, would be 261 hertz. Now, take a look at where that is with respect to the 2 black keys, or the twins. It is to the left of the twins. Do you see that? It is the first white key to the left of the twins. So if that's how we define where C is, then this is also C. This is also C. This is also C. We'll go backwards now towards the bass. We skip the triplets, twins to the left, twins to the left, twins to the left, and then we run out of keys. So I've just pointed out all of the C's. Well, almost all of the C's, and we'll talk about that in a second. I need you to visualize us continuing the piano. If we were to add more keys to the right, you might think that we have twins, then we have triplets, then we have twins, and then we have triplets, and then what would we have? Well, we would probably have twins again, right? So it always goes skip a black key there, so 2 white keys next to each other, and then the next grouping, and we did that. So in fact, this last note on the piano is also C. And now let's go backwards on the piano. Well, here's a grouping of twins, and here's a single key. If I were to extend this to the left and add more keys, you might expect that this would be a triplet, and you'd be right. So this is not going to be a C. This is going to be a different pitch. Now if you look, doesn't the distance look the same between each of the C's? Of course this is not to scale, but this is to scale with itself. So this distance is the same all the way through. How many C's do we have on the piano? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. Now, the way you locate middle C on the piano, well, if you sit at it, it tends to be towards the middle of the piano. It's not the perfect middle of the keyboard, but it's pretty close. It's certainly the closest C. And also, you might notice that it's somewhere near the middle. Now, the piano I own is called a Heinzmann. That's the name of the manufacturer. So their logo would be right there, printed right near the keys. And it's the C that falls right underneath the logo of acoustic pianos. So that C, we give a standardized number. We call this one C4. Not like the explosive, it's just a number to tell us which C I'm referring to. So if I told you to play C on the piano, you'd say, which one? There are 8 of them. So that's C4, and that's great. So you'd expect that the one below it would be C3, the one below that would be C2, and the one below that would be C1. Above, C5, C6, C7, and C8. Seems to make sense. Well, we're missing the 6 other pitches now, right? So the best way to do this is the alphabet goes in order, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so do the white keys. We're not talking about the black keys just yet. So if I were to say the key in front of C or to the right of C, what letter would you guess if you think about the musical alphabet? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You might guess that C, if I go forward in the alphabet, the next note is going to be D. And in fact, all of these notes are D. And we run out of keys there. So I have just labeled in blue all of the notes D on the piano. If you want to figure out how I found them so quickly, you might use the strategy we used for C. So you pick the location and you figure out where it is with respect to the black keys. D happens to be the white key that is right in the middle of each of the sets of twins. Here are the twins. Here's the note D. And I would continue to use this system until you've used up all of the letters. So we've used up C and D so far, so we have how many more? 5 more. Let's try this. Let's go backwards now. Let's go to the left of C, or lower notes than C. So if this is C, let's go one backwards to this guy right here. So C, backwards, this must be B. So this is B, that's B, this is B, this is B, and this is B. This is B, this is B. And now let's talk about this one. So earlier we mentioned that if you extend the keyboard, you would see a set of twins. Over here, if you extended to the left, you'd see a full set of triplets. So this one black key, even though it looks different than the rest, is really like a set of triplets that was cut off a little too early. So here's the triplets, and if we cut it off too early, we'd lose everything to the left of this, the second black key. So this key right here is like the third black key in the series. So yes, this one right here is also B. Alright, we'll continue on. So if that's B, the one that comes before it must be A. And that is true. And my colors look very similar. I'm using orange there, and red was for C. If they look the same on camera, I'm sorry. They are not intended to be. So all of the A's. And now that we know where all of the A's are, you might think to yourself, well, the A's are sort of between the second and third black key of each of the triplet groups, or to the right center. Because there's 3 of them, there's not really an absolute middle, but there's a left middle and a right middle, so you could consider it the right middle. And we only have 2 keys left. Sadly, I don't have enough colors to do this, but we'll label them anyways. Here's G. It's the left middle of the triplets. And no G's down here. 2 more. We have E and F. And E and F are interesting, just like B and C are interesting, because there's no black keys in between them. And that's something we'll talk about later. but it's something to note. So E and F. E is the first white key to the right of the twins, and F is the first white key to the left of the triplets. That's how I remember it. However you remember it, whatever works for you, you're welcome to use. So I'm going to slide this up and out of the way. The next skill I think you should definitely have in music theory is the ability to be able to draw a keyboard yourself. I've been playing piano now 12 years at the time this video was filmed, and I can visualize a piano very easily. You may not be able to do that, and if you can't, there's a very easy workaround. So we're going to start by drawing one. And if you ever have an assignment that asks you to count half steps or count distances between notes or visualize a keyboard, you should draw one on the back or on the top or on a blank sheet of paper, anything to help you. Or, if it's an option, walk up to a piano. So we're going to start off by drawing the shape of the keyboard, which is just a big rectangle. And I'm giving myself lots of room. Now we're only going to draw one octave. So I drew a big rectangle. And now I'm going to draw 7 vertical lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And don't worry about this extra space, as long as these are evenly spaced. Now we're going to start with the twins, and you're going to skip the end ones, well, this end one, the left end one, and we're going to start by drawing little rectangles that represent the black keys over top of the lines we made. So draw a rectangle and then color it in. So I'm sort of going half on this side, half on that side, and then all the way up. And I'm going about halfway down the distance. And then color it in once again. Now, you've drawn 2 of them, right? And this is the important part, because just like a piano, there are certain spots where we don't have black keys. This is it. So we drew the twins. Now we need to skip this line and move to the next. So we're going to draw on the next one. Color it in. Next one, color it in. So we did twins. Now we can do triplets. And so 1, 2, 3. There we go. Now, of course, we wouldn't draw anything here, right? Because we just did twins, skip, triplets, skip. But if I continue on, you would imagine that I'd start again with twins. And then we're just going to get rid of the rest of that. So what note was it that I said was to the left of the twins? If you remember, it was C. C, and then this would be a twin. We don't have the whole thing, but we know. So that would be C. And now we can just go in order of the alphabet and label the keys. So D, E, F, G. We ran out of letters, so we start again. A, B, and it lines up with our C. So now we have figured out how to draw a keyboard. And this is incredibly useful, one of the most useful things, I think. So remember when I gave C a number, C4 or C8? Well, we give all of the pitches letters. It's called the American Standardized Octave Designation. And it just tells you which one out of the entire musical scale or system or entire keyboard you mean. So this is C4, and this is C3 down here, C3, and this is C2, and this is C1. So everything that's between C3 and C4 has the number 3. So you continue to the right with the same number. So that means if I pick this G right here, it's between C4 and C5, so it's G4. Nothing turns to 5 until after C5. So you'd think that the beginning of the alphabet would start the changes, but in fact it's C. So whenever you get to the next C, that's when your number changes. So C1, D1, E1, F1, G1, A1, B1, C2, D2, E2, F2, G2, A2, B2, C3, D3, E3, F3, G3, A3, B3, C4, and so on. So the number continues to the right until you get to the next C, and then you up the number once. And that is how that number designation works. So this is middle C on the piano. If it's printed on a piece of music, well, then that's the key you play. Now, we need to get back to how do we place this on a staff? Well, we have to start with a blank staff, of course. So I'm going to place a blank staff here. Actually, there's two blank staffs. They're called staves when there's more than one. It has 5 lines and 4 spaces. The 5 lines are parallel. And it tells me an order, a series of pitches from low to high. But I need a locator. I need a landmark. And what I use as a landmark for my staff, singular or many, staves, is a clef. And a clef is your locator. A clef tells you a certain pitch, and then you can figure out the rest. So before I draw my clef, I'm going to put bar lines at the beginning and at the end. This, as I just mentioned, is called a bar line, and we use them to show the beginnings and ends of staves, as well as to mark measures, which we haven't talked about yet. We will, I promise. Clef. Oh, it looks like I drew that over the edge, so I'll just adjust there. A clef. Well, let me start with one you've probably seen, and it's called a treble clef. And there's a way to draw this. I'll draw it twice for you. So I'll show you the way it looks first. There we go. That is a treble clef, or a G clef. And the way we draw that is you start with a very tall letter J. So I'm going to start with a hook that starts below the staff, and the letter J goes all the way above the staff. So we have that. Now you draw a letter D, which connects to the staff. So it's only connecting to the staff. And then you have sort of a half of a heart that's upside down. I know that's a lot to think. So it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it goes all the way down to the bottom line of the staff. And then it curls back up, and it circles the second line. So we need to go backwards just a little bit. So I said something there. It circles the second line. So the way we label things in music theory is from bottom to top, usually. And the way we label the lines is from bottom to top, and we call them line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, and line 5. And the same thing for the spaces. We have 4 spaces. Starting at the bottom, it's 1, then 2, then 3, and then 4. So as you can see, the treble clef, or G clef, circles that line 2. And if I follow it through with my marker, you'll see that it does indeed highlight line 2. Now let's write the name. This is called the treble clef. Or the G clef, and I prefer that name. The treble clef, treble or bass. Treble means high, bass means low. So treble clef is higher than the bass clef. Talks about notes that are higher. But G clef is more specific. So you remember that I said that this inner region sort of circles line 2? Well, it's very convenient because it actually shows us where G is. And it turns out that this is G4, so it's the G right above middle C, and that's great. So that's G. Well, where do I get the rest of them, right? That doesn't seem like enough information yet. Well, the alphabet you can use to solve for the rest of them. Sounds boring, I know. Solve for the rest. It sounds like algebra, not music, but it works. And the way we're going to do this is as follows. So the alphabet goes in order: A, B, C, D, E, F, G. G is the end, so if we want to continue going up, that means we're going to go forward in the alphabet. But since we're at the end of the musical alphabet, we have to start again. And the thing to remember, though, is it has to alternate line, space, line, space, line, space, line, space. If you don't alternate, then you're actually skipping a note, and it wouldn't go in order. So let me write in the space A, then the line would be B, then the space would be C, then the line would be D, then the space would be E, and then the line would be F. Now we need to go backwards. So if this is G, the letter that came before G was F. The letter that came before F for the line was E. The thing that came before the line was D, and we can continue. Now, before I go too far, I want to show you something. Notice that we almost have a word here, right? If I get rid of this D, like I didn't draw it yet, you have the word face. Starting from the bottom and going to the top, it spells the word face for the spaces. For the lines, we have ujdbuf, which isn't a word, so we make up an acronym. It's every good boy deserves fudge, and that's the way I remember it. If you have something better, leave it in the comments, email it to me, or if you just like it better, then use it if it helps you remember. So every good boy deserves fudge for the 5 lines, and face for the 4 spaces. Well, that's treble clef. Now in piano, we have 2 hands, left hand and right hand. And when you sit at the piano, the high end or the treble end is to your right, and the bass end is to your left. So it makes sense that the right hand should play treble clef because that's higher up on the piano. So then that leaves the left hand to play something else. Now again, I'm going to close in my staff with bar lines, and now I need a clef to tell me where I am. I'm lower in the piano, so I'm not going to use the same clef. I'm going to use, instead of treble clef, bass clef. So remember how we numbered the lines? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we labeled the spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4. To begin bass clef, you are going to draw a nice big dot on line 4. Perfectly on line 4. Now we're going to make a big half heart shape that goes up to line 5 and all the way down to line 1 almost. So watch what I do. So it curves all the way up and just touches line 5, and then it swirls back down almost to line 1. And the last step is to put 2 little dots, one in the middle of line 4 and line 5, and one in the middle of line 3 and line 4. So it's sort of straddling line 4, right? So there's a name for this clef. Let's write it out. This is called the bass clef, or the F clef. It tells us where the letter F is, or the pitch F. Just like treble clef or G clef told us that G was on line 2, this one seems to be hinting at something important around line 4. So I would wager a guess that line 4 happens to be F. So I'm going to highlight line 4 with my marker. And it turns out that line 4 is in fact F. So you see that these clefs are actually very useful. They're kind of like locators. So bass clef or F clef tells us where the letter F is, and this clef seems to be pointing that there's some importance around line 4, so line 4 is F. We want to know more than just F, right? We want to know the rest of the notes here. So we're going to go in order. Let's try descending first. So let's do the alphabet here. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now if this is F, remember we have to go through all the spaces and lines. We can't just skip lines or we'd go out of order. So if I want to go in order to the next lowest thing, that would be this space here. So one lower than F, so we're going backwards if we're going lower. So this must be E. Then one lower than E, or one further back, would be D. One further back would be C. One further back would be B. One further back would be A. Oh, we're at the end of the alphabet, so now are we done? Nope, now we cycle back to the other end and we continue backwards. So this is G. Now we need to go forwards. We've used up all the lines and spaces backwards, so now we need to go forwards. So F. The next thing after F is G, and that would go on this line here. And then the next line after F, well, G's at the end, so we have to go backwards to A, so we'll put A on line 5. So now, unfortunately, unlike the treble clef, where the spaces actually spell the word, we have no words spelled out directly for bass clef. So we have two sayings. For the spaces, we have a 4-letter or a 4-word phrase, all cows eat grass, or, if you like better, all cars eat gas. Either one works, whichever you prefer. And for the 5 lines, we have a 5-word phrase, golden birds do fly away. Something I'd like to mention, if you notice, if we were to shift a little, we go in the same order, right? G, B, D, F. Golden birds do fly, and if we had another line, you might imagine that it would be A up here. Well, it's not really that surprising, because if you look, it follows the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It continues on upwards and below. So even though we are only showing 5 lines and 4 spaces worth of notes, or 9 notes total, we could actually go higher than the bass clef, which would technically overlap with treble clef, or we can go lower than bass clef, which would go even lower or further left on the piano. We can go lower on treble clef, which would start to get into bass clef, or we can go higher on treble clef, which will go even higher in pitch and to the right on the piano. So left hand is playing bass clef or F clef. The F clef tells us where F is. We can figure out the rest of the letters from there. Treble clef or G clef tells us where G is in the middle of that big swirl. We label everything from bottom to top, 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bottom to top spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I were to give you L4, that might tell you that you're going to put a dot on line 4. So L4. All right, I should put a dot right here on line 4. Or space 2. Oh, I should put a dot on space 2. That's where it's talking about. All right, so we know what staff is. We know what staves are. We know what bar lines are. We know what clefs do. We know what the clefs tell us. We know the order of the musical alphabet, forwards and backwards, and we've now plotted out notes on this thing. We don't know all of it yet, though. We have one more thing to do. Well, for piano, we play left hand and right hand. Right now, the bar lines are not connected. They don't go through, which means that I would first play this line and then I would go down to this line. In order to tell me to play this together, or play both hands at the same time, I need to connect these lines here. These bar lines go all the way through. And then this tells me that these things are happening at the same time. Whenever you put bar lines through multiple staves and you have things happening at the same time, so maybe an alto singer and a tenor singer, or a right hand and a left hand, that is called a system. This whole thing is called a system. And there's a very special kind of system that we use when we play piano, and that is called a grand staff. Now, we need to make one because we don't have one here just yet. So let's place a new set of blank staves here. Now, what can we do? Well, the first thing is to bar line both of these together. So instead of just barring one, I am going to bar both. So I'm going to start at the top and go all the way down, here and at the end. Now, at the end of a piece of music, you typically see a double bar line, and all that means is you're going to see 2 of them next to each other. Sorry that they coincided there. That was just not so great artistic skill showing through. And now we need to do a curve bracket at the beginning. So we're going to start outwards. It pops in, has a point, back in, and then together. And that's the curve bracket I'm talking about. Now a grand staff, or the grand staff, let's title this The Grand Staff, refers to the thing you read in piano music where you have both right hand and left hand playing at the same time, where for the right hand you're reading treble clef. Remember, you draw upwards of the tall letter J, letter D down to line 5, upside down half heart down to line 1, that circles line 2. It tells us where G is. And we also have the left hand, which you read in bass clef, which has a big dot on line 4, half heart up to line 5, almost down to line 1, and then 2 smaller dots that straddle line 4. And that tells us that line 4 is F. Well, we discussed that you had E, G, B, D, F for the lines of treble clef. Every good boy deserves fudge, or does fine. So this line was E, but I told you that you could continue lower. So if I put a note here, you could figure out that that's E, that this one on the space is F, and then that this one on line 2 is G, because it lines up with line 2, which that clef, or the G clef, circles. Well, you can continue backwards. So the next thing would be a space note. We don't really have a space that's bound by 2 lines, but we do have this thing where we can put a note that's in space but still touching a line. And that, if you go backwards in the alphabet, G, F, E, D. If you go one further, instead of a space, it would be a line note. So we're going to make a line note, and we don't have any lines down here, do we? But if we put a note there that's no longer touching this line, and we draw a line through the center of it, we have now made a line note. And let's try this out. G, F, E, D, C. This guy right here is super important. This is middle C, the same middle C we talked about on the piano. Let's start with this one. Let's put a note here because it's very convenient to read. So if I put a note on line 4 of the F clef, that note is F. If I go to the space above it, I'm following the order of the alphabet forwards. So F, then G. The line above that is still following the order. That's A. And now I don't have a space here, but I have a line, so I can put a note on top of it, and it still technically counts as a space note. So that is B. So F, G. Now I have to reset my alphabet. A, B, C. Oh, that's interesting. And I could write middle C here also, a little closer to the staff. But middle C is middle C because it's close to the middle of the piano, yes. But middle C is actually middle C because it's almost perfectly in the middle of the grand staff. Yes. So it seems like 2 separate things, doesn't it? Treble clef and treble staff, and then bass clef and bass staff. But it's actually like a continuous set of notes. Let's try it out. F, G, reset the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So in fact, you might play middle C with either the thumb of your left hand or the thumb of your right hand. Thumb of left hand, thumb of right hand. And in beginner music, it often has you try out both ways. So isn't that interesting? Middle C kind of divides the grand staff directly in 2. It happens to fall above the bass clef, and it happens to fall below the treble clef, so it's a divider. So now we know that this right here is middle C. This is like our home button on our iPhone. We need to know where this is at all times. So this is called middle C, or by the standardized octave designation, you might call it C4. And that C, whether it's printed to look like it's directly in the middle or not, is actually middle C. So What do I mean by that? I mean it might be printed like this. And that doesn't look like it's in the middle of anything, but in fact you read it the same way, because it's not touching line 5 of bass clef, and it has a line through it. So it's not the space note that's right above the staff, it's one above the space note. It's the next line note. So that's middle C. And same thing here. You might see this printed down really far down here, and even though it looks far away, it could still be printed for treble clef as middle C or from bass clef as middle C. Or you might see it way up here. But if you see a line through it, the point is, if there's no other lines around, it's not touching the staff, and it has a line going through the center of it, it is middle C. And this is the grand staff. And all of these notes correlate with the piano we looked at just a bit ago. And let's see if we can line this up a bit. So we're going to move around just a little bit. I'm going to cover up that middle C. Not sure if I like how much you can see or not. So instead of that, what if I go the opposite way? A little better. So, if this right here is middle C, and this right here is middle C, when you see a note printed that looks like that, or that, or that, or that, anything that's not touching either staff and is in this center space, and has a line through it, that's the important part, it's not touching and it has a line through it, you know to press this button on the piano, middle C, the one to the left of the twins, and it's right near the logo of the acoustic piano. Acoustic meaning not electronic. It's not a digital keyboard, and it's not an organ or something like that. Other keyboards that have less keys, middle C might not actually be in the middle of the instrument. It might be lower or higher depending on which side of it they cut off. So, if this is middle C, and this is D above middle C, then it's talking about this D, not this D way down here that skips a bunch of notes and is lower, and not this D way up here that's way too high, right? We're going one step above C, so we're going one white key above C. Now, we haven't talked about how to access the black keys yet. That involves the use of accidentals, such as sharps, flats, things like that. We'll get into that a bit later. But right now, try and figure out your way around the grand staff, the treble clef and treble staff, the bass clef and bass staff, and align it with an actual piano keyboard. I will see you in the next video